Darrell Steinberg has been leader of the California State Senate since 2008, and the first Senate leader from Sacramento since 1883. During his tenure, he's had to grapple with deep program cuts to deal with the multi-billion-dollar deficits that the state has faced and the demands for the restoration of those cuts as the state's fortunes have improved. As he approaches the end of his term as Senate Pro Tem in October, we'll ask him to look back on his leadership and what he thinks needs to be done to make government generally, and the legislature specifically, more responsive in addressing both the everyday needs and future aspirations of the largest state in the nation. California Retrospective, a conversation with Senate Pro Tem Darrell Steinberg, leader of the California Senate.
Additional funding for the Maddy Report made possible by a grant from Paramount Agricultural Companies, growing healthy food for you and your family.
From the California Channel at the state capitol, Valley PBS, and the Maddy Institute, it's the Maddy Report with Executive Director of the Maddy Institute, Mark Keppler.
We're coming to you today from the Senate Democratic Caucus studio at the state capitol. Our guest is Senate Pro Tem Darrell Steinberg, who will be ending his tenure as leader of the California State Senate on October 15th after 6 years due to term limits. We're delighted to have him join us to talk about some of the successes and challenges he's had over his tenure, as well as his perspective on the role of the California legislature in shaping California public policy. Welcome to the Maddy Report.
Good to be with you, Mark.
Well, first, why don't you tell our audience a little bit about your background? How and why did you get involved in politics?
Well, I grew up in the Bay Area. I grew up in a middle-class community. I like to say I graduated high school the year before Prop 13 passed, and what that means to me is that even though I grew up in a middle-class community, there was always after-school sports, and the rec center and the library was always open, and I never had time to get in trouble even if I wanted to. And I had a very rich, not financially rich, but rich childhood in terms of experience. And I was motivated from a young age, really, to think about trying to do something in life that would help other people, and was drawn to the law and to law school. And I went to UC Davis Law School after graduating from UCLA. After UC Davis, I got my first job in Sacramento, and the job didn't last long, but I got involved in the community and the Jewish community and the Human Rights Commission. I started a neighborhood association, and then in 1992, the incumbent council member called me the night before the filing deadline for her re-election and said, I'm not running for re-election.
The night before?
The night before, 10:30 at night.
Late notice.
So I can literally say I decided to run for office overnight. And,
gosh.
And I did, and it's been 22 years, 20 years of active service within those 22 years, and it's been great.
Well, let me ask you this. What is your proudest legislative accomplishment?
I think there are three things, but or maybe four, but I think the thing that I'm most proud of is that my work has led to over $1.5 billion worth of continuing investment into California's mental health system. This is an issue near and dear to my heart, both personally and otherwise, and I feel very strongly that it's one of the underattended to issues of our time, and that the failure to deal with mental health and mental illness causes many other societal problems that we spend a lot of money on and that cause a lot of heartache, whether it's homelessness, criminal justice, family dysfunction, child welfare. And we've made a real difference in building a public system and literally helped tens of thousands of people.
I was doing a little research, and I think the number is $8 billion has been raised.
Well, cumulatively, Prop 63, the Mental Health Services Act, generates about $1.3 billion this year.
Wow.
In addition to some of the legislative work over the last couple of years where we've invested hundreds of millions in crisis beds and triage workers, and this year $100 million or so in connecting mental health services and the criminal justice system. Done a lot, but the more I do, the more I realize how much unmet need there is.
The need never goes away.
Never
What
goes
about
away.
education? Recently you were a big proponent for creating universal pre-K in California.
Yeah.
Why is that issue so important, and what do you say to those folks who say, well, the process really doesn't work, or it's too expensive?
Well, I've had a couple of major focuses when it comes to public education, and early childhood education is one of them. But I think the thing I'm most proud of is in this year's budget, for the second year in a row, We are gaining another $250 million to re-engineer and change California's high schools to build career pathways for high school students. We can no longer afford to have a system that's either focused on high academic standards or vocational education. We need to combine the two so that every student's got a pathway to a high-wage job, and there's tremendous excitement out there. I'm very proud of that. In addition, this year—
Will that money be going to community colleges? Where will that money be going?
We are, the first round of money, the first $250 million, we had over $700 million worth of applications, and they're generally collaborations between high schools and high school districts, community colleges, and lead California industries that work together to say that at age 15 or 16, it's not too early for young people to begin to understand the relationship between this, quote, boring subject that they're being forced to learn as part of their graduation requirement, and what it might mean for their future and their job interests. So we're combining career application and academics by bringing in industry, collaborating with high schools and with school districts and with community colleges to create soup to nuts, so that a 15 or 16-year-old can not only have curriculum that's taught in a way that's much more interesting and applied, internships, summer jobs, ultimately post-secondary assistance either for apprenticeship or college, and then a job in the industry itself.
Let me ask you this. We've only got about 30 seconds left, so this is going to be not a lot of time, but have you ever passed a law that in retrospect you might have regretted? Any do-overs?
I've authored a number of bills where I landed on my butt, where I did not succeed. I took on sales tax sharing in 2001 and 2002 and lost. But then it led to my effort around regional planning and SB 375, which has now changed the planning landscape in California. Smart growth is now the norm. And my failure in not getting sales tax sharing created enough controversy, but also interest, that it led to an ultimate success. I have one or two more examples of that.
Well, we'll get to those in a moment, but up next, we're going to talk about the legislative process. You know, Otto von Bismarck was quoted as saying, "Laws are like sausage. It is better not to see how they're made." Well, we're going to ignore his suggestion and take a closer look at the legislative process. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. We're talking with the leader of the California's Upper House, Senate Pro Tem Darrell Steinberg. Well, let's talk about the legislative process for a moment. Governor Brown has stated not every problem needs a solution. So do you think the state legislature maybe passes too many laws?
I understand the criticism, and there may be some truth to it, but look, here's the nature of the process. There's 120 legislators. They all represent districts. They all have strong opinions. And even though there are a lot of bills, the process actually works pretty well because the process works as a funnel. And a bill that is introduced, if it gets through the whole process, is not necessarily the bill that is the end product. It has to go through numerous committees. It gets refined, it gets amended, it gets changed, it gets defeated. A number of bills get defeated. And what ends up on the governor's desk, by and large, is the reflection of 9 months of work, and more often than not, the bills address significant and important public policy issues.
Well, let me ask you this. What's the survival rate? If I'm a legislator and I present a bill, what's the chance of that thing getting signed into law?
Well, the chances are probably about 50-50 that some version of the bill will get signed into law. The chances are virtually nil that the bill as introduced will make it to the governor as it was introduced, and that's the way it should be.
It's the starting of the negotiating process.
Exactly.
Let me ask you about supermajority rules, where you have to have a 2/3 majority to do things. Some argue that that gives way too much power to the minority at the expense of the majority. Others say, no, you need this to prevent majority overreach. What are your thoughts on supermajority rules?
I have a very strong opinion here. The most important thing that the California voters have done over the past 25 years is to pass Proposition 25, which allows now for a majority vote budget. It's not that the point of view of the minority party is not important, it is. And in an ironic way, since Prop 25 passed, I think there's been more bipartisanship and nonpartisanship,
Why?
at least in the Senate, because there isn't that age-old opportunity to leverage every major decision. Why did we have interminably late summer budgets year after year after year? People say, well, the legislature couldn't get its act together, state government wasn't working. I don't think that's true. Number one, we faced some of the most catastrophic financial times and economic times in recent history. When I started as pro tem, we had a $42 billion deficit. You ask me what my great source of pride is in terms of my tenure over 6 years, beyond any legislative accomplishment, is that I'm the last one standing from that era, and I'm leaving California and the legislature better off than when I started, and the state's in much better shape. We got surpluses, reserves, and we're beginning to restore some of the cuts. But the point is that there isn't that opportunity to hold up the budget based upon narrow interests. The budget gets done on time. Fourth year in a row an on-time budget. That's good for California.
So propositions are good. Does there need to be any modification of the initiative or proposition process?
I actually have a big bill on that in my final months in the legislature. I want to bring back what's called the indirect initiative. What does that mean? Right now, an initiative proponent has to submit signatures generally in February, March, or April of an election year. Once those signatures are submitted, it takes a long time for the counties and ultimately for the Secretary of State to certify the measure, but there's no turning back. In other words, if there's a negotiation in those intervening months, the initiative proponent has to follow through. Now, they don't have to campaign.
But there have been situations like that where it stays on the ballot where it's already been resolved.
My measure would say that up until the time the Secretary of State is actually ready to publish the ballot pamphlet and put the election ballot together, an initiative proponent can withdraw the initiative if they choose. No pressure, but if there is in fact a legislative solution to the problem, they can withdraw. That'll be a dramatic improvement to the initiative process.
What about the role of the legislature in an oversight of the executive branch? So you pass a law and the executive branch administers it. You want to make sure it's being administered the way you intended. Is there anything that should be done or could be done to improve the oversight process?
Absolutely. I think one of the other things the voters of California did recently was change term limits so that now a member can serve 12 years in any one house. I serve under an era where it's 6 years in the Assembly, 8 years in the Senate. I'm lucky I've had 14. But let me tell you what the 12 years in one house will mean. It will mean that members don't have to be so anxious about putting their name on a bill or authoring a bill. Instead, more time can be spent on oversight, which is, I think, a lost art in the legislature. There have been some signature examples of good oversight, whether it was the Quackenbush investigation, whether it's the Senate office we have to conduct oversight on a systemic and ongoing basis. But by and large, there's not an incentive in the term limit era for members to spend that time on oversight. I think the change in term limits is going to create more opportunity for oversight. It's very important.
Okay, well, legislative oversight also includes dealing with the bad actors in the legislature. How to deal with ethical lapses in a way that restores public confidence in the legislature. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. As the California State Senate Pro Tem, Darrell Steinberg is not just the leader of his party, he's the custodian of the institution's integrity. Well, while you've been described as squeaky clean, you have presided over a Senate where you have 2 members that have been indicted for federal corruption charges and a third that's been convicted of perjury. You've said, quote, "I know of no ethics class that teaches about the illegality or the danger of gun running or other such sordid activities," unquote. So if these are just the personal failings of a few bad apples, what, if anything, can be done about this problem?
Well, I have been of 2 very clear minds on this subject, and no one could have anticipated this. I certainly didn't anticipate it, and it's certainly not in the pro tem leadership manual how to deal with these things. But I've said 2 things. Number one, the actions of a few, the alleged actions of a few, do not reflect the behavior, the ethics of the vast majority of members. The people I have the pleasure to lead and serve with are hardworking people who put the public's interest first. Having said that, I think that what's happened in the Senate this year does give us an opportunity and frankly an obligation to step back and reflect on what we can all do different. And there's no question that money in politics is a very real phenomenon, especially with the Supreme Court saying that money is speech in unlimited forms. And we have to be very conscious and reinforce a code of ethics that says that you must be willing and able to look your supporter in the eye and tell them, on this one, I'm not with you, if it's the right thing to do. Secondly, while we're not going to take money out of politics, we can do some things like what we're doing in the Senate to call for blackout periods where during the major time when we're hearing bills, there is no fundraising. August, the last month of the session, by Senate rule now, we will not be allowed to collect fundraising checks nor solicit checks from lobbyist employers. I think that's a good thing. In addition, we've now put forward an ombudsperson in the Senate to ensure that any member of the staff, member of the public, a member, him or herself, who sees unethical behavior can complain, even anonymously. So what is that? And there'll be some intervention.
So the ombudsman will work out of whose office?
The ombudsman will work for the Senate itself, but they will have independence.
Okay. So, but if someone brings a complaint to the ombudsman, what power do they have to rectify the situation?
They will have the full authority of the Pro Tem's office and the Senate Ethics Committee to intervene, and hopefully intervene first in an informal way, to say to the alleged offender or to say to the office, there have been a number of complaints about XYZ, you need to knock it off. Or here's what you need to do. Because if you don't, this is going to lead to real trouble. And I think these are the sorts of changes that reinforce the culture that I continue to be proud of in and around this institution that I love, that the vast majority of people are there to do the public's business, and they do it honestly.
You know, LA Times columnist George Skelton was talking about, the cost of running for office, and he noted that it's actually more than this, $1 million to run a state Senate campaign. Is that the problem? Is the root of all evil here money?
Well, I think it's two things. I think money is a real problem. I think there's way too much money. But the public is frankly of two minds because they largely don't support public financing of campaigns. And at the same time, they don't like this system. And the Supreme Court, I think very erroneously, has not been willing to say that it is legitimate to put some limits on political expenditures. As a result, no matter what you try to do to limit contributions, for example, all that does is empower wealthy individuals or outside interests to spend even more money, quote, independently.
Money is disclosure, maybe transparency, the answer?
I think transparency and disclosure are very important, and we're beefing that up as well. But I have to say another thing, and that is that people come to public office, I think, largely with their character pretty much formed. And if you're an honest person, then a lot of what goes on around you won't affect your core or your willingness to make the right decisions. Politics is politics, and sometimes you have to make compromises. Nobody's, absolutely pure here. On the other hand, if you come to the office with a different kind of character, the temptations are there. There is too much money in the darn system. And I think it provides a recipe for trouble for some people.
So the answer is elect honest people, I guess. Well, up next, we'll talk about California's future, its challenges and opportunities. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. We've been talking with Senate Pro Tem Darrell Steinberg about his tenure as leader of the California Senate. I'd like to take a look forward now at the future of California. I want to talk a little bit about the partisanship that seems to be occurring in state politics. You know, it's interesting, where the Senate Democrats meet, just off the floor of the state Senate, is the Ken Maddy Lounge. Ken Maddy is our namesake. He was a former Republican leader in the 80s and 90s. Seems like a lot has changed since he was in office. What do you think about this increasing partisan divide? Is it just a moment in time, or is this the new normal?
Well, I think contrasted to what goes on in Washington, D.C., California legislative politics is a lot more bipartisan. We have our arguments and fights, but let me tell you, the Senate, even with some of the challenges we've had this year, is a place where there is civil discourse, and we work well together. And I think if you talk to Bob Huff or anybody on the Republican side, or at least most of them, they would agree with that. And so when I look at Ken Maddy, I get to look at his picture every Tuesday here. I didn't have the privilege of knowing him, but I wish I had, because he epitomizes everything that I think is right about politics. And in some small way, if I could live up to his ideal, or if I have lived up to his ideal, then that's a good thing, because I believe that politics is about fighting hard for what you believe in and not being afraid to argue and to fight, but in the right way. Right. And ultimately, as a mediator, I know that what's most important is not only what you stand for, but what you actually get done. Because when it's all said and done, what do I leave with? I'm going to leave with a lot of friendships, a lot of great relationships, and a lot of great memories. But I'm going to leave with a record of accomplishment. And that's only done when you are willing to look at what you want, but then look at what you can get and ask yourself, am I moving a big agenda forward? Child care and preschool this year, great example. I wanted universal preschool. Instead, we're setting a path for universal preschool for all low-income 4-year-olds. Is it everything that I wanted? No. Is it a big stride? Absolutely. Does it set the stage for somebody else to then take it to the next level? Yes.
So it's all about moving the ball down the field. I want to ask you about the Republican Party a little bit. I know you're the leader of the Democrats, but the Republican Party has been a bit of a decline, and if trends continue, a decline to state are going to outnumber Republicans by 2024 in the state. Is that a good thing for the legislative process? Don't we need a loyal opposition?
I do think we need a strong two-party system. And I will say that even though I am a strong partisan Democrat, what I have seen over the last 2 years, again, since Prop 25 went into effect, since Democrats won their supermajorities, I see more Republicans now beginning to get it. I'm seeing more Republicans in the legislature voting for California's versions of immigration reform. I'm seeing more Republicans understand and accept that equality for gays and lesbians represents the majority of where people stand, and it's the right thing to do. I'm seeing Republicans cast votes on things that they never would have touched even 3-4 years ago. Not all of them, but I'm beginning to see a change. And I think, yes, that may create more competition between Democrats and Republicans, but I think that's a good thing.
Well, last question. We've only got a minute left. I want to ask you this. What are the biggest lessons you've learned as a legislator and political leader? And what advice would you give to the next generation of legislators and political leaders?
When you come into the legislature for a limited period of time, it is absolutely essential that you focus on 1 or 2 or 3 things that really matter, and hopefully they're things that nobody else is really paying much attention to, so that you can use your passion, your intellect, your ability to actually move an agenda forward. And finally, I would say, to paraphrase Winston Churchill, when you're in politics, never, never, never give up. Fight in the right way for what you believe in, and you can accomplish great things for people.
Well, I want to thank Senate Pro Tem Darrell Steinberg for being our guest today. If you want to stay current on state and local politics, you can sign up for our free and award-winning e-newsletter, The Maddy Daily, by logging on to our website at maddyinstitute.org. And now, another perspective.
Under term limits, legislators can spend their time working on bills that'll please the insiders. They can spend their time plotting their next run for office, or they can find an issue or two to try to make their mark. Senate President Pro Tem Darrell Steinberg found several issues, but none had greater impact than the 2004 initiative he sponsored, Proposition 63, the Mental Health Services Act. It added 1% onto the income taxes of people earning $1 million or more to pay for mental health care services. The ballot argument read, almost 40 years ago, California emptied its mental hospitals, promising to fully fund community mental health services. That promise is unfulfilled. Because of his efforts promoting that initiative and his negotiations as Senate President Pro Tem, California spends $2 billion more per year now than it did back in 2004. He continued that effort right up until the final budget. He told me one of his proudest achievements was to provide $15 million to start special research facilities at UC Davis and UCLA to study mental illness. That's dust in a $156 billion budget, but it's a start, something no one else had done. You can argue that $2 billion is not enough and that too much is spent on trivial programs. There's some truth to that. We certainly see plenty of lost souls sleeping by freeways. But the reality is that California dedicates real money to mental health care. Steinberg's leaving office this year because of term limits. My guess is he'll come back and run for some other office. But even if he doesn't, he will have left his mark on California. For the Maddy Report, this is Dan Moraine. Thank you.
The views expressed in the Maddy Report are those of the individuals participating in the program and do not necessarily reflect those of the Maddy Institute, the California Channel, Casey, or Valley PBS. If you'd like to share your thoughts about the points and opinions shared in the Maddy Report, visit our website at valleypbs.org/Maddy.
This is Mark Keppler for the Maddy Report. Thanks for joining us.